Welcome to Mid-Maryland Votes, the middle ground where Maryland comes together for real conversations. Today we're joined by Steve Whisler, retired Navy officer and member of the Carroll County Board of Education. We're digging into what's broken in Maryland's school systems and why Carroll County continues to set the standards for education done right. Now let's get into it. Welcome to Mid-Maryland Votes. I am your host, Mark Flynn. With me as always is my co-host,
Ethan Lowen.
And we have a very special guest tonight. We have Steve Whisler. He's a candidate for state delegate, and he's also currently a member of the Board of Education for Carroll County, Maryland. Steve, welcome to the program.
Thank you for having me. I appreciate the invitation.
We're glad to have you. So tell us a little more about yourself, sir.
Well, I'm a father of four living here in Carroll County, Maryland. So I served 10 years in the enlisted ranks in the Navy as a linguist. I speak Persian Farsi, the language of Iran. And then after my 10-year stint as a enlisted linguist, they made me an officer, and I served my last 10 years in the Navy as a cryptologist. Retired in 2006, became a teacher in Maryland Public Schools. I taught in Maryland Public Schools for several years. Went from one job where everyone did what I told them to do in the defense industry to the classroom where nobody does what you tell them to do. So that's kind of my path and where I am today. Yeah, I graduated high school. I wasn't really sure what I wanted to do. Didn't have a whole lot of money for college. And I wanted to see the world. So that's why I joined the military right out of high school. And it was the best decision I ever made.
I'm the same way. I feel like it was the best decision I ever made, even though my mother made it for me. Anyway, we're all three veterans here. We're from different backgrounds, different places, but we have a lot in common. We all either have children that went through the school system here in Maryland, or we are part of the school system in some way, shape, or form. And I'd like to concentrate a little bit on that tonight. Carroll County has an excellent educational program for the state of Maryland. And you're the Board of Education, which you're a part of, seems to really have a great grasp on what the kids really need. What sets Carroll County apart from all the other counties around them, including Frederick County, which is having major problems right now?
And just I want to preface this. My comments are my own. I'm not here representing our school system or our Board of Education, so I want to make sure I clarify that. But, Carroll County really does it right. And I'm not saying that just because I'm here and because I'm on the school board, but Carroll County, we have a few things that sets us apart. Some of them may surprise you. Point number one, we have the lowest student to central office staff ratio in the state. Right. Also, we are the lowest, maybe now the second or third lowest because our commissioners kicked in a bit more money. But we were last year the lowest as far as per pupil funding in the state, the lowest. So we're the most efficiently run school system in Maryland, in my opinion, out of the 24 jurisdictions. And we routinely, year after year after year after year, place top 3 in math, science, and ELA, English Language Arts, always. And it's because of a few things. One, we have just amazing educators in our county. We have educators that willingly and cheerfully partner with our parents. And we also have a fantastic superintendent and central office leadership that ensures every educator in our system sticks to curriculum. So we don't allow political and social ideologies to permeate too much in our schools. We don't tolerate it. We don't like it. We don't want it. And, and our teachers follow that. And we see the results. We see our students excelling in comparison to other counties.
And when you look at other counties, and you see the trouble that they're in. So there's Frederick County, which of course neighbors you. But you can look at many Montgomery County, Prince George's County, Baltimore, et cetera. You mentioned, you don't let political ideologies in the classroom. Is that really what it is? Is that the secret sauce, or is there something more to it?
Well, it's a couple of things. One, I think the very first thing is you got to stick to curriculum. And that's really it. There's only so many minutes in the school day to teach our children what they need to know. And when you allow teachers and educators to inject their own bias, their own preferences, you just get off track. And you get off track really, really quickly. and you waste those valuable minutes in the classroom doing what you should be doing.
Mm-hmm.
You know, introducing students to concepts, practicing and reinforcing those concepts, giving those, the final exams and the summative test scores, exit tickets that you need to make sure that the children, got what they had to get. We're also pretty big on homework here in our county. Having kids do homework and challenging them with rigorous material. But sticking to curriculum, making sure that the parents are connected. Those are just two big things that we don't see in other counties. We just don't. Our parents are very engaged in Carroll County. You ever go to a PTA meeting or a band concert or a play, the parking lot's packed after hours with parents.
Yes.
And that's just something I didn't see when I taught in Baltimore County. And in Baltimore County, they were really fixated, at least when I was there years ago, on trying to inject things that I just don't think were appropriate for the classroom.
And I believe that you're absolutely correct. I mean, one of the things that we hear a lot are parents that are talking about how their children, know their teachers' politics. They know things about their personal life, even some things that romantic aspects of their personal lives. I mean, it's actually quite disturbing, I would say. But what you're saying is that you go out of your way to make sure that does not enter the classroom, and that's one of the things that you think is making the difference.
Well, yeah, it is, and again, you need a top-down approach, and it's very unfortunate if you just look at the environment at the top in some of the aforementioned counties you've said, right, Montgomery, and it's just a different mindset there, and the voters have elected folks in office that have these ideologies, these preferences, and they enact policies that their superintendents and senior leadership in schools must follow. And I got to tell you, as a former teacher, as a former educator, and I hear it now as a board member, I have so many educators walk up to me and say, thank you. Thank you for keeping this stuff out of our schools. We don't want to teach it. And educators are not the enemy. They're not. Educators have kids in the school systems too. Educators don't want their kids indoctrinated, right? The so-called, indoctrinated word. Educators want to come to work. They want to teach their craft. They want to do, they want to do their very best and inspire their students to great heights. And so the problem is not the educator. The problem are the bureaucrats in Annapolis that try to push unrealistic and outrageous curriculum down the throats of counties, and also those local county elected officials that shove it down the throats of their superintendents and force them to inject those inappropriate things into the curriculum there.
And it also trickles down and is force fed into the educators, which we go on record. We love our teachers and our educators. We have some of the best here in Frederick County. You have them in Carroll County.
Washington County as well.
They have excellent educators. Unfortunately, they have an administrative staff that does not back them up, that acts as a proxy for these agendas that are coming down. And you mentioned something earlier, which is interesting. You said that Carroll County had a very low administrator to educator ratio. Is that what you said?
The absolute lowest in the state. And we're in competition with Allegheny County. We compete with Allegheny County, I think it is, for the lowest staff to student ratio in the state.
So the staff, non-educators, not boots on the ground, they're not educating children, administrative staff in the schools here in Frederick County, the last I checked, it was almost 1-for-1. There was almost one for every educator. In other words, there's more administrative people than there are educators in the Frederick County public school system.
Look, we want to make sure every dollar's in the classroom as much as possible. And those educators need to be surrounded by para-educators and support staff, like your reading specialists, your math specialists, your one-on-one support assistants that redirect children that need constant redirection to get back on task. In Carroll County, we also, I think last year, we poured about $18 million more into special education than what we were required to by the state of Maryland. So that is how we choose to do things in Carroll. We are really, look, we're blessed. We don't have a lot of problems that you see in other counties, the 24 jurisdictions. So we have lower concentration or lower areas of concentrated poverty. So we don't have some of the hardships you see in other parts of the state, like a Baltimore City or portions of Montgomery County or PG County, or some of the remote locations like maybe Somerset County. We don't have those kinds of challenges facing us. But we believe that local control is critically important. Our superintendent and staff and principals and assistant principals know where we need to put the money, retool and redo our curriculum. We reconstitute our lessons, and many of our lessons are also approved and checked by parents. We have a lot of parent groups. We have several committees of parents that actually work alongside our curriculum developers. And so we just have a very good process here in Carroll County of making sure that we address needs when we see them quickly and efficiently.
You mentioned earlier that you had an excellent superintendent and a leadership, basically, of the Carroll County school system. Right now, Frederick County is going through some major crises. They've had incidents of students being sexually assaulted at the end of last year at one of our local schools. This year, they have indicted a teacher for taking advantage of special needs children. Is this a systemic problem with the Frederick County school system, or is it a failure in leadership, or is it both?
I know 3 of your board members very, very well. And the feedback I have from them is that they don't think it's systemic. They actually like their superintendent. And they've told me privately that, they think their superintendent is under a lot of pressure from some of your more, let's say, liberal Board of Education members in that county. And again, the superintendent is supposed to exercise the collective will of the Board of Education. So, look, I've been involved in education for many years. I liken those incidents where you have a bad teacher or a really inappropriate action to the police force. You have bad apples in the police force, very, very rarely, very occasionally. I think it's the same thing in our education systems, throughout the nation. But when you don't force educators to stick to curriculum, when you don't insist on professional relationships between educators and students, you only invite problems like what you just described. And this is why I'm so personally against the introduction of anything sexual to our children. We need to stick to biology. We need to stick to things that are related to science, and we need to get we need to stop sexualizing our curriculum. We need to stop sexualizing the topics that we talk around children. And this notion of talking about gender and sexual preference and sexual identity only invites these unfortunate things that you just described.
And it is top of mind of parents. Parents come to school board meetings on a regular basis across the state, talking about the violence that their children are experiencing. Teachers come to school board meetings saying the same thing. And parents talk about how there is a lack of education, academic performance for their children. Like, these are universal issues: the violence, the lack of academic performance, and of course, as you mentioned, the sexualization of the curriculum. And that actually just went to the Supreme Court in the Mahmoud versus Taylor case that occurred in Montgomery County. So these are things that are happening everywhere. Where is it coming from? Because this isn't anything that anyone up until just a few years ago that I'm aware of was saying, oh, this is what's happening. Certainly not when we were children. It wasn't like this in Broward County and Fort Lauderdale when we were in school.
No, it wasn't. Now, I have a few things I'd like to blame if I can. One, I think there's an over-reliance on technology. I think we give our kids way too much screen time. We are not allowing our children to collaborate, to talk, to exchange ideas. We are instead putting their heads in a screen and having them do assignments, and there's very little interaction. So our kids are not developing those critical interpersonal relationships. So I think, over-reliance on technology and screen time is terrible. Also, we are subjecting our children the curricular wishes and whims of organizations that are just dominated by, in my opinion, leftists. It's just very, very unfortunate that we have groups like Castle, and we have other groups such as the NEA, that are trying to inject their personal political and social ideologies and agendas into our curriculum. And that's what's, I think, sexualizing our curriculum, sexualizing our books. The content of libraries today are far different than they were when you and I were kids, Ethan.
The elephant in the room, we haven't talked about it, but we should, is this: the outside influence of the teachers' unions. As an educator, as a past educator, and now as a Board of Education member, how do you view these teachers' unions and their interaction with the school systems?
Yeah, I think one of the greatest dangers to our society are the teacher union leaders, without question. And again, some people may roll their eyes when you hear people say that, but educator unions are not about student outcomes anymore. They're just not. They say they are, but they're not. One only needs to go to the most recent NEA convention, where everything out of their rules committee was coming out political. It was about I think they mentioned Trump several times, and it's so political. They're not about outcomes for kids. They're not about, hey, what's the latest and greatest methods and methodologies to teach? It's all political. And so I'm sorry, but our teacher unions are a tremendous threat to parent rights. They are demonizing parents. They're making parents enemy number one. They're not back to where they should be, and that is, how are educators doing in the classroom? Are they checking ourselves? Are we checking ourselves? What could we be doing better? How do we collaborate more? Unions aren't about that. Unions are 90% of what they do is about politics.
And it is organizations like the teachers union. I mean, I don't believe the teachers union represents teachers anymore. Teachers are making the candidates that are not their union's candidates. They are voting for them. They're voting against their union. I think that speaks volumes.
Here's another problem with that, though. You talk to a teacher's one-on-one, and I have lots of friends that are teachers here in Frederick County. They're afraid to talk about the union. I mean, that's a bad situation to be in, being a good teacher who wants to teach your kids, and you're afraid of your own union, because the latest statistics are that many, many teachers are leaving the union.
About 35 to 40% of our educators in Carroll do not belong to the union.
What do you think it's going to take in order to turn this around?
It's the classic case of, if we can't get the kids to a certain level, let's just relax the standards, right? I mean, this is something that's been going on predominantly over the last 3 decades. It's really sad. We have to insist on high standards. And we being 3 military men, right? Imagine if the physical fitness standards where you could weigh 30 pounds more and take another 10 minutes to run that mile. Guess what? Everybody would have met that standard, right? Everybody goes down to that lower standard. We don't do that in Carroll County. In Carroll County, we raise standards. We enforce standards. We find out, what kids need, what support structures they need through data, through empirical information. And then we erect those supports and we get them to where they have to be. I think we were 4th in algebra. I think we're always like 1st, 2nd, and 3rd in algebra too. So it's about standards. It's about curriculum. It's about sticking to it. It's about not acquiescing and giving up and giving in, because that's too easy. And unfortunately, folks that want to go that path, they like the easy path. And that easy path doesn't help our kids, and it doesn't put us on the right path. And we need to stop pushing the mindset of you can't do, and we need to instill you can do. When you implement these DEI practices, or this notion of oppressor versus oppressed, all you're doing is encouraging people to admire the problem, rather than to look back and say, it was a problem, but it's not anymore, because this is what you can do. This is how you can achieve. If you work really hard, this is what you will become. But we're not doing that. Instead, many school systems around the nation are pushing the mindset of, gosh, isn't this terrible? And isn't it terrible that this is what happened to us? But instead, so they spend 55 minutes doing that and only 5 minutes talking about what can be done. Well, we do the exact opposite here in Carroll County. We talk about what you can do. We talk about what what skills you need. And that is really it. It's about mindset and it's about approach. And I just wish other counties in our state would take that perspective.
You're creating overcomers instead of victims.
Yeah, I tell people all the time, stop admiring the problem.
But one of the most encouraging things when it comes to our public schools in this last election is that the teachers unions candidates, they in Maryland, they're called Apple ballot candidates. Historically, I believe that about 70 to 80% of school board members in the state are teachers union endorsed candidates. This past election, it was, I believe, less than 50% of their candidates won. In other words, parents, families rose up around the state and really made a very large change in numerous school boards. And so obviously on the local level, a lot of these things that you're talking about are being attempted and being pushed by these candidates who were elected by families and teachers. However, on the state level, what I've seen is a couple instances just this year where the Democrats in Annapolis, if you know, they're from that political party, they have been putting out some changes that have been trying to take control away from local school boards. It's in response to how the people elected candidates that are not in congruency with their philosophy in Annapolis. And so they're trying to take control away from the local school boards. Can you give us some insight into that?
Yeah, that has been happening. I worked alongside a few other Board of Education colleagues that have similar values to mine. And we worked very hard 2 years ago to recruit, educate, and empower candidates across the state. We also worked with some notable national figures and organizations to help bring in assistance in their campaigns. And we were successful in flipping, if you will, at least 4 boards of education across Maryland. And now there are 4 more boards of education that lean conservative rather than the other way as before. And that is despite the fact that the Maryland Democratic Party and the Teachers Union in Maryland collectively put about $1 million into their Apple ballot candidates across the state. $1 million collectively. So much for nonpartisan races. I think we would have flipped Cecil County and Calvert County, and maybe even St. Mary's County if they hadn't put that $1 million in, because we were on a trajectory to see those counties flip as well. So the power brokers in Annapolis have noticed. They're very nervous. They are going to try to put candidates in every office in the state this go around. They're going to be pushing a lot more money down to local elections and into their Apple ballot candidates. We were also seeing some administrative actions by some political figures in state government, press and shake down, if you will. Some of, like for example, Somerset County. The Somerset County Board of Education is currently being investigated by the Office of Inspector General for Education because their board flipped. Their voters had enough. And the Somerset board got rid of their counsel, their legal counsel, that was basically not giving them correct information. They got rid, or they tried to get rid of their superintendent. Somerset is one of the worst academically performing counties in the state, and they wanted to get rid of their superintendent. Yeah, so we see the state coming down really hard on Somerset County, and it's very, very unfortunate. Somerset voters wanted a difference. They wanted a different environment. They wanted change in their schools. And some of the big power brokers in Annapolis are stopping that. And it's very sad to see.
I guess one of the questions that I've always pondered is, what is the goal? What is the point of all this?
Well, the point of all this, at least in Carroll County, in my opinion, is giving educators everything they need to do the job, in a responsible way that is, amenable to the taxpayers that pay for that service. And it's about education and making sure these kids get an education. And it's about keeping the politics and the social agendas out. It's funny, the Apple ballot candidates, they're not about that. They want to put the ideologies into the curriculum. I, as a conservative, if somebody came to me and said, our schools should be talking about pro-life and our schools should be talking about guns and no. Our conservatives that we see running for boards of education spots around the state, they don't want to inject political and social ideologies into the curriculum, but the other side does. Like the Mahmoud V. Taylor thing you talked about, where the Muslim parents were very upset that LGBTQ books were being read in a kindergarten class. They just simply don't want that in their schools. They want the ability to opt out. School systems today could take that Mahmoud v. Taylor Supreme Court decision, and they could pass a policy tomorrow saying parents have the right to opt out anything LGBTQ. And I guarantee you that the state of Maryland would come down so hard on that local county, it would make your head spin. The State Department of Education would implement a pause on the policy, so they would tie it up in the courts as long as they could and fight as long as they could in hopes that they get a brand new administration, or in hopes that the Board of Education that made that policy is flipped. But that's the game that we play in the Board of Education world, and it's very sad. It's not about kids. It's not about student outcomes. It's about political fights, political disagreements between adults. Anybody that goes through a divorce, what's the first thing the judge tells you? Don't put the kids in the middle between mom and dad's fight. We see our kids in the middle of adult fights all the time in our school system, hurting our kids. It's wasting our tax dollars, and it's not helping the 3 out of 4 kids that can't meet math standards, or the 1 out of every 3 kids that can't read at grade level. There's another big Supreme Court case that you'll see next summer that we're all keeping our eyes on, and that's BPJ versus West Virginia. Is a court case where a child in West Virginia a transgender student sued to be able to play, in girls sports. And it went through the Fourth Circuit Court in Richmond, of which Maryland must follow. And the Fourth Circuit Court said, yes, transgender kids can play in girls sports. That case is going to be looked at by the Supreme Court in the spring, and we're probably going to see a decision in the summer that will likely overturn BPJ. That case also probably will be looked at by the Supreme Court. And so you see some pretty major Supreme Court decisions coming forward, I think, in the coming months that will totally empower conservative boards across Maryland to go, nope, we're not doing this anymore. And I think it's going to be a real rocky, highly politicized environment in Maryland if the state legislature and the Maryland State Department of Education are trying to stop these boards from implementing policies that local voters want.
You are Maryland's representative or president, maybe, of the National School Boards Coalition. Do you mind telling?
Correct. Yeah, I'm the state chairman.
Chair. Do you mind telling us what that is?
Yeah. So we have what's called the National School Board Association. The National School Board Association is the predominant player on the field in America that has a lot of the school systems. It's got a lot of members, but there's been a lot of criticism of the National School Board Association in some of the politicization that we see nationwide. They've got it just as badly. And so there's a thirst out there for, a group, the National School Boards Coalition, that will provide the same kinds of services to school systems and Board of Education members that don't want to see that happening in our schools. School systems and board members like me that want to see parents have rights in how their kids are educated. And so I was honored when their search firm contacted me. Apparently, a lot of my colleagues across the state dropped my name to them. And so they interviewed me and they asked me if I would do it. And I was thrilled to accept.
And when you talk about the National School Board Association, I believe that is the organization that many people may remember from the news, where they requested to the Biden administration that the Biden administration has the FBI investigate parents who come to school boards and speak
exactly right.
School boards are doing as domestic terrorists. And so you are
correct.
The representative to replace that here in Maryland. I applaud you for that on behalf of all of us parents.
School board members have a tremendous amount of power over curriculum and over how local school systems are run. And I'm finding that a lot of my colleagues just don't understand and know that they have this power. They're working for superintendents. They think that the superintendent runs everything, and they don't realize that the Board of Education is supposed to exercise governance, set the path and the strategic direction of the school system. So the National School Boards Coalition is going to do a great job in just networking, educating our Board of Education members, calling into place more governance principles, and making sure that we're focused on student outcomes and not politics and social ideologies.
Steve, I really want to thank you for being here tonight. You've done a great job. We'd be remiss, though, if we didn't talk about the fact that you're running for state delegation. I believe you're running for the position of one of the gentlemen we just interviewed a couple weeks ago, which was Eric Boucher. Is that the position you're?
Yeah, Eric Boucher is not running, and so I had a tremendous amount of support. A lot of people contact me and say, hey, you need to sit in his seat. Look, in this county, I led the charge to get rid of our books, age-inappropriate books in our schools. I said no to $42 million more in taxes and funding for our school system to meet blueprint mandates. We pushed back, and we had the state change their policies. And we avoided $42 million in local taxes here in our county for that. I've been asked to join folks down in the trenches in Annapolis to, I say, make sense common again. Because there's a lot of things happening in Annapolis that just that don't make sense. And so I'm just eager for the challenge, and I'm so grateful for the support. I have several members of the state legislature that already endorse me, and I'm going to roll out those endorsements here soon. Our sheriff endorses me. Many of the elected officials in my county endorse me. And so I'm hoping to rely on their support as we move forward. And we will see how the results look on June 23rd, which is the primary. There's a lot to do down there in Annapolis. There's a lot that you can accomplish as a conservative in Annapolis. And I'm just eager for the challenge.
Well, we wish you the best of luck. You are a very good common sense candidate who any parent should be able to get behind.
Well, I appreciate it. And if anybody wants to learn more about me, they can go to whistler4delegate.com. Again, WHISLER, the number 4. delegate.com. I'd look forward to connecting with you. And again, my campaign slogan is let's make sense common again.
We will link to your site in our comments section as well, Steve. Well, that's it for this episode of Mid-Maryland Votes. Thank you for joining us. If you've enjoyed the content of the show, please like, follow, and share, and with all of your friends or your enemies. We don't differentiate. On behalf of me, Mark Flynn, your host, and my co-host,
Ethan Lowen,
we thank you again for being on Mid-Maryland Votes. Have a great night. That was Steve Whisler from Carroll County Board of Education, a man dedicated to leadership, education, and community values. When the rest of Maryland struggles, Carroll County leads by example. Hey, you've been listening to Mid-Maryland Votes, the middle ground where Maryland comes together for real conversations. Like, follow, and share for more conversations that matter. We'll see you next time on Mid-Maryland Votes.